think it's good to spread awareness.
Why is it that you get to tell other people what to do?
Because I have a lot of subscribers. I have a lot of subscribers. Says something about my... Oh, you're filming right now?
Shut up and then try to basically and the white woman, but you was too chicken to like all this stuff.
The only thing this spider did is further split society. Oh, you're proud of yourself.
So to spoil the fun on one aspect of the post-Dahmer video reaction, I mentioned the possibility of an SNL parody of Dahmer with Evan Peters. So I've had people say that the SNL did try to do a new Dahmer parody and it did not go down well. But I can't really find anything other than a few people like mentioning it vaguely, so I'm gonna have to say that's unconfirmed currently. We're gonna have to call that an unconfirmed report. This is the wrong way around. Sorry to spoil the fun, folks, but you know.
Story, Mom. If you look at it from the back.
It was really interesting how when the video came out, there was this initial wave of people that sort of were familiar with my channel and generally knew what my takes were, and so they had their sort of perspectives on what I was saying, and then the video went out to like a broader group of people that had no idea what any of my opinions were on anything, and getting me a good variety of takes.
30 minutes of I'm offended. Stop making things I don't like.
Everyone's offended. Grow up, General Z.
A lot of you aren't mature enough to be into true crime. Stop crying. It's not gonna be sympathetic. Dahmer went through a lot.
Unfortunately, you have to be British. This seemed like it'd be nice to watch.
I think there was some fairly legitimate criticisms too that I also wanted to cover on top of some of the funner stuff. I think in terms of like the major themes of criticism or just feedback from the video, I would sort of tier it from like least to most valid, I guess. The censorship argument, the awareness argument, and then the exploitation argument, or the hypocrisy of the exploitation argument. I'm going to cover all three of those things. There's going to be moments in the video where it maybe seems like I'm coming off as flippant or overly jokey about this stuff. It's just when you receive such a wave of different feedback and different takes and perspectives, it's a lot to sort of take on board, but I hope that I can be clear right now that I do think there's some legitimate things to say. I have questioned a lot of my takes since the video came out just like a week ago. It's left me just a little unsure what to think. Needing some alternative perspectives, I think.
Hey everybody, today we're going to be talking about...
What do you think about Dahmer, Phil? Phil, don't you have a take? Don't you have a take for YouTube, Phil? There's definitely a certain baseline of comments, mainly from people that are less familiar with my channel, that just think it's a censorship argument. And I do want to be clear on that point. For me to advocate for censorship would be for me to say that what this show is should be illegal, or that, like in this case, Netflix should be legally forced to take down the show. And I don't advocate for that in the video. Censorship is something that does concern me a lot too. I think it's very important for art to explore sensitive areas and for people to not just feel like they can get something taken down when it offends certain sensibilities or whatever. Now, I do think that in this particular case, yes, the victims' families should have a certain level of legal agency beyond what they've been given in this case. But I really don't think that that can just be immediately conflated with advocating for like state censorship of material that offends me or something. Even if I thought Dahmer was completely wrong-headed, there's plenty of media I could name that on a very personal level completely offends my own sensibilities. But in that, like Sky High, actual fascist eugenics propaganda? I'm just generally not going to argue from the perspective of wanting the state to come along and like ban this material. I just think that that's a completely different conversation from one where we're talking about this show. I can say that on a personal level, I wish that something didn't exist, or wish that something doesn't exist, and I think that's a different thing from demanding it be banned. The way you talked about having the capability of thinking of doing terrible things as awful and depraved is disgusting. People shouldn't feel ashamed for having intrusive thoughts. Educate yourself and do better. This guy would be quite shocked if he thinks everyone's internal discourse is moral and wholesome. A thought is a thought, especially when you keep it to yourself. You can't even fully control all thoughts. Okay, so I have a couple of different thoughts on this. So first of all, fuck off.
Fuck off.
Fuck off. And second of all, fuck off. I think it's interesting that of all of the segments in the video, the segment that was called out was one where we were talking about learning about cases in which people's children had been kidnapped and then brutally murdered. Yeah, having that call with my mum, it definitely reminded me of that experience of having a parent who was very protective because they were very aware these kinds of tragic things that can happen, that there are these evil people out there that could potentially be wanting to do terrible things. How the brutal murder of this small child affected my mum, and that in turn affected how I was raised. I don't think there's anything wrong with having intrusive thoughts. I also don't think there's anything wrong with being traumatized by knowing that someone wants to kidnap you and... This is the problem with the framing of that show, is that it causes people to, because the show makes this clear effort to turn Dahmer into someone who's a bit more of a sympathetic figure.
He is almost regretful and has guilt and sort of confusion about what went on.
Like half of the show is just dedicated to his childhood and all the different things that may have led him to becoming the person that he is. I think it's very easy for people to get pulled into this very Hollywoodified protagonist perspective on Dahmer and then immediately conflate that with anyone that might have any kind of mental health problems. Dahmer's problem wasn't intrusive thoughts. Dahmer's problem was that he had thoughts that you might see as bad, but those were his desires, and he thought about those desires, and then he planned to act on those desires, and then he acted on those desires. It's not an intrusive thought just because it's a thought that you wouldn't want to have. And especially this framing of me as someone who's going to be like intolerant of anyone who has any kind of deviant thoughts. This has nothing to do with me being intolerant of anyone who might have these negative thoughts. It can be traumatizing to learn that people are capable of doing those things. There's nothing wrong with pointing out that those kinds of things can be traumatizing to people. Just because for large chunks of its narrative, Dahmer as a show frames Dahmer the individual as just kind of this alienated, like nerdy, weird kid who maybe should have had people like keeping track of him or checking in on him, doesn't mean that you need to immediately act as if Dahmer is interchangeable with anyone that might have any kind of general mental health issues. I mean, we can get into the fact that you're even fucking comparing a serial killer's planned actions to any mentally ill person's negative thoughts. I do think genuinely that this is a good example of why you need to be very careful when it comes to these kinds of depictions. When it comes to trying to get some kind of message out of these depictions. I think if you do it sloppily, if you do it haphazardly, you do get people like this. I am not comfortable immediately conflating Dahmer's particular crimes with just general mental health issues that anyone can suffer from. People with general mental health issues don't have those thoughts and then immediately start planning how to act them out and then act them out. I think both the movie and the show, if they are especially lacking in any particular area, is that they really emphasize the idea that Dahmer did a lot of crimes of passion, and that was not the case. He planned out what he was doing. Now, obviously, does that point to some kind of mental health problem? I would say it does. But it's a very specific and unique kind of problem that isn't interchangeable with just anyone that has an intrusive thought. I know that you watched the show that took great pains to create a sympathetic protagonist portrait of Jeffrey Dahmer. The show leaving out the fact, for instance, that many people who were in the same prison as Dahmer recounted times in which he gloated or made jokes about the fact that he did kill and eat people. The show left that out, and I don't blame viewers for therefore not knowing about it. But if you want to come into my comment section and admonish me for being too, like, shamey...
Go fuck yourself.
Now, cards on the table, most of these comments are not trying to out-woke me. It's kind of in the other direction.
What the fuck?
They were really just my glasses, I promise. They were really just my glasses. There was a list of glasses I was allowed to get, and I saw those and I thought those, well, you don't really see many people wearing glasses like that. So that was why I chose them. I also thought maybe I'd look a bit like Paul Dano. I don't look like Jeffrey Dahmer.
And to imply that, I find quite insulting.
There was a lot of comments that were just sort of generally asking me to compare and contrast Dahmer to other fiction adaptations, and in particular My Friend Dahmer, which I alluded to in the video. I admit I had not watched it. I was more using it as an example of the sheer volume of media already covering Dahmer and his crimes. As for the thing itself, I never read the comic book that it was based on, but I have this inkling that I would have preferred it. I think there's this strong sense that it is the personal recounting of someone that knew Dahmer, talking about their experiences or like using this piece of art to kind of communicate that. And I think maybe as a comic that would be conveyed a bit more strongly, because as a movie, I wasn't sure exactly what I was sort of meant to take away from it. Obviously, art doesn't need to be this clear message that's very straightforward, but as this movie was kind of recounting the experiences of Dahmer as a teenager, the message seems to be that Dahmer was an unexceptional weird kid in a fairly mundane existence. The kind of kid that maybe you would have known in school, except then Dahmer would go on to commit heinous crimes. When I was filming the last video, one thing that sort of crossed my mind was the fact that where we currently live is within feasible driving distance from Dahmer's like childhood home. And there was the part of me that was like, while I was researching the video, was like, oh, should I like go down to that area and just see how it sort of feels? Should I film like a segment in a nearby park or something that would be like adjacent? And then I was like, no. As I thought about it, I just thought, well, what would I really be gaining from that experience? I guess I would be I'd go down there and I'd be like, wow, this is a town. This is a normal town. This is a suburb in Ohio. I think sometimes we can confuse curiosity with something profound. Like, the idea is that by getting deeper and deeper and deeper into the personal details of somebody's life or someone's personal experience, that through that there's going to be this kind of profound moment. And I think that does come across in a lot of media, specifically about serial killers, like assuming that as we get deeper into that somehow there's going to be this sort of, oh my god, now I completely understand exactly how they thought and how they felt, and that's going to tell me something about.
Yeah, I did a lot of research for Jeff. There's a lot of videos, so I use those a lot, and I would actually reference those, I think, almost every day. Sometimes even like before every scene, I would watch that video a lot. When I would slunch over, and when I'd get into his posture, I was Dahmer at that point.
And that's kind of how I felt with My Friend Dahmer. I feel like it was a well-constructed film, and it does a really good job of conveying that feeling that Dahmer just had this fairly like regular life. And I'm definitely not going to put it in quite the same category of the Netflix Dahmer show, because the movie does, and I assume the comics too, hold off on sort of this fetishistic showing of the specific brutal murders of the victims, getting really into their personal lives with no consideration for the actual people being depicted. That's a whole other side of the Netflix Dahmer conversation that I don't think is as much of an issue with My Friend Dahmer. But I still think it's kind of there because of the subject inherently. And that brings me to this feeling that it doesn't quite justify itself as a piece of media to me. I don't think it should be banned. Please stop dunking on me on Twitter. I don't do that.
Well,
unsure what's the thing. Needing some alternative perspective.
You know, Jackie's gonna try to talk to you. You don't have to fucking listen to him. Piece of little fucking dog shit, little poopy ass motherfucker.
Do you think I look like someone who knows about serial killers? Because I do.
One thing that's really notable about serial killers is that they're always fans of serial killers. It's also like a big reason why so much of the pseudoscience around serial killers, all of the like behavioral sciences, criminology stuff is nonsense, because like that's also written by people who kind of admire serial killers. Like almost all American serial killers have applied and failed to get in to the training academy for the police.
What do you call a serial killer who doesn't fail the entry exam? Not guilty. Really troubled that a lot of the literature around it is always like cops who are being like, if you gaze into the abyss too long, the abyss gazes back.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm a little bit crazy because I like serial, whatever.
Yeah, we're both like big fans of Mindhunter, right? Which like very much gets into that, where it's like this sort of obsession, and then obviously like to some extent as a viewer, you're kind of like buying into his experiences because you're also kind of getting invested in this stuff. You've talked about like this idea of proper representation. So how do we properly represent these people? And this has been like a big issue, you know, in my comments, for instance, when I look at my comments, people being like, oh, well, what's wrong with necessarily portraying with sympathy, some degree of understanding or trying to get to the bottom of what turns someone this way? What's wrong with that in and of itself?
Your straw man alternative in that comment, right, is the only way to represent them as inherently evil. Absolutely not. Like, we should absolutely not be representing serial killers as inherently evil. That completely buys into so much wrong with the way that people who break the law, and especially serial killers, have been discussed since time immemorial. For as long as people have been talking about this, don't portray them as inherently evil. The problem with portraying them sympathetically, there is a problem with how men behave. I think Zizek points this out. When you point out bad behavior, like the worst possible behavior, and you show it, and you really like go, look, men are like this, but you don't show like men could be better, men could be like this or whatever. Well, the example that like boys and young men have is this one, right? And then they're like, even if I am the worst possible type of guy, I'm still a recognizable type of guy. This is the same problem we have with like school shooters. Isolated young boys who are really angry as hell, and then they see like a ton of attention that kids who are like them are getting for acting in a certain way, even though they're being told this is a wrong and bad way to act. We're all social animals, and like we do get like a little dopamine hit or whatever when we just are getting attention, and then we know that we will when we see other people getting that too. Relatability is a big problem there, because if you can identify yourself with the character you're seeing who's doing the wrong thing, and you know they got so much attention for it, they got this Netflix series made about them, right? All of this, then ultimately it's still an option in life.
You want to firstly, like, not show it as an option, and you want to secondly, like, show positive options. And this is so much of a problem with all media that talks about serial killers, because the good guy in serial killer stories is always a fucking cop, and moreover is a cop who's obsessed with serial killers. So it's kind of like the next most likely person to be a serial killer besides the serial killer who's actually doing serial killing. You do want to show the ways that serial killers behave come out of people who have like serious issues and like so many like maladaptive coping mechanisms. I mean, that's kind of a mild way to put, you know.
Like, okay, I used to live in Shoreditch, where Jack the Ripper operated, and there are walking tours of the places Jack the Ripper killed sex workers now in 2022. I find that so gross and also just like irresponsible and dangerous, because again, it's just like that serotonin hit, right? It's just like you could be being talked about for 200 years from now if you murder sex workers in a dark alley. That's the issue of relatability.
New York. New York.
That's what they say.
The city of angels.
That's what they say. Talk about your...
New York, the city of angels.
Are you filming?
Yeah.
Are you filming? Well, if you're filming, why
New York, the city of angels. So all this time I've been trying to hold off on the segments because it felt like Henry didn't really want to do them. But now it's like the last day we're here and Henry's like begging me a little bit. Like, Henry wants to take part.
I just need a little bit of that clout. A taste of that clout. Talk about Dahmer. Talk about you talk about your cucked Dahmer video.
Do you have any opinions on Dahmer? Do you want to share?
You know I like the first episode of Dahmer, Jack.
Yeah. As we were watching the episode, Joel kept kind of saying, your video is kind of bullshit, right? Like, one of the things actually was about clout. It was about the idea that I was doing something exploitative with that Dahmer video. Yeah. And then when I presented it to you, you were like, I didn't realize that wanting to say things that are true and good on the internet was like clout chasing. I thought you had to say things that were bad and not true. Well, that I will say that is tricky. The idea that by saying a correct belief, it's now not exploitative. Obviously, that doesn't work with the Dahmer show, for instance, right? Because it's making use of subjects that haven't consented to being made use of. Yeah. Which is kind of what I'm doing in some kind of sense. I mean, I guess you're maybe encouraging people to watch the show. I mean, this has been the tension from the beginning of talking about bad people on the internet, people talking about platforming them. You know, that's really the same conversation that's been had for years now, and I still don't care about it. I don't really buy into the whole, like, I'm gonna make everyone into a Nazi by talking about the Nazis thing. And I don't think I'm exploiting anyone, or you are, either. Yeah, so, really, as far as that argument goes, my friend Big Joel has said that. So now I've been given permission by Big Joel. So I don't really see the
Do whatever you feel like you need to. At this point, it's become so unrecognized. Like, the problem is that victims of the thing didn't want the show to be made in a way that like exploited their tragedy for entertainment, and to make this sort of point about how Jack's doing the same thing, it just doesn't really feel grounded on Earth. It doesn't feel like it's on planet Earth. No, they would want people who agreed with them to say it because they have beliefs.
I could throw up the Matt Boers comic on screen and just say, ethical consumption, capitalism. Isn't everything kind of all relative when everyone's kind of trying to make money all the time? Which is the case. I can't run a charity out of my YouTube channel. I need to make an income to continue to survive. So as far as doing that, I'm trying to do what I do in the most ethical way I can, which would include, for me, talking about things that I think are serious issues and should be talked about. And that did throw me for a loop when I considered that what I was criticizing was a show that argued much the same thing, that it was providing some kind of awareness for an issue in which a spotlight should be put on it. But I guess at the end of the day, do I see a fundamental difference between what I'm doing and what Ryan Murphy and the team behind Dahmer did? And yeah, I kind of do. I feel like, as much as possible, I have taken pains to act with respect to the family. Definitely comparative to the show, I'm not exactly presenting the imagery that the show does, that voyeuristic, very fetishized violence that's clearly shown episode to episode. You don't really see any of that in my video. It's mostly focused on criticizing this piece of media, trying to highlight the thoughts of these people that have clearly been ignored through this process. We all are, I guess, trying to navigate capitalism with the awareness that we want to be good people, but we also don't want to be in poverty. And if I wasn't making money from my YouTube channel, I would probably be in poverty. So you do have to make a judgment, and I think I do accept that. That's in part why I advocate for the victims' families in this specific case getting a little bit of legal agency, because I think in these cases where it is left to a choice of your own ethical line, large corporations that don't really give any thought to the ethical implications will definitely take advantage of that. It can lead to what I consider to be extreme situations, like with Netflix's show, without at least some kind of legal precedent. There are, I guess, judgment calls and then things that go beyond judgment calls. You can't just relativize everything. I know I'm a big hypocrite for saying that.
Oh, wow, that's so cool.
That's so cool.
Wow, that's really cool. Wow.
That's so cool. That's so cool.
That's so cool.
That's so cool. Twitter, that's really cool.
My personal thoughts that I need to express. You know, what if the show was good? What if it was, like, really thoughtful and cared a lot about being smart and didn't just use its black characters as just, like, nebulously virtuous prompts to be murdered and mistreated? It's just so weird, the Glenda Cleveland character. I would call it, like, racist. Like, yeah, like, Glenda Cleveland as this, like, really banal scene. It seems like it's taken directly from, like, The Help. Glenda Cleveland is fundamentally just a character to be, you know, express the nebulous virtues of the show itself. She has no voice. She has no autonomy. She's not a person.
I feel like there's like a certain politics surrounding the fact that they felt like they could just take her and turn her into like an amalgamation of any number of other women who are in a similar position.
This real human being is turned into a fucking empty shell of a woman. It reeked of an unproductive, sort of malignant white guilt. That's my opinion.
See, it felt like the two components were very voyeuristic, very fetishistic depiction of Dahmer, but then this very conscious, like, well, we can't just make the show like this, so we have to at least isolate a chunk of the story for acknowledging that this is a terrible thing we're actually doing.
A bunch of sort of nameless, featureless black people to convey the fact that we're not making pornography.
And then it's like so isolated too, like the Jesse Jackson episode. Like it's just this one episode that is just for acknowledging the racial dynamics at play. And it's incidentally the shortest episode of the show. The main thing that's been interesting in the edit is like trying to figure out how sympathetic I should really be to the people that are like, well, actually, I felt like Dahmer was very, brought to my attention a lot of mental health issues that I was dealing with, and it made me think about that. And it's like,
it doesn't really matter. You can watch paint dry and come away with it, secrets to the universe. It doesn't really matter. Their opinion on what the show managed to do in their minds is great. That's all that there is to say about that. Like, it's fine, whatever, man. It's great. Sounds great.
Because I talked to Sophie a little bit about that part. I've actually gotten like a few comments from people saying that watching the show was helpful to them because it helped them identify behaviors that they did relate to with Dahmer, and they felt that helped them in some way. And it's like, that's a really interesting take.
I think there's a lot you could get into that I probably won't in a casual discussion without a lot of like a forethought about like gendered socialization and people who have like a fundamental like disconnect from like, for example, from male socialization, who don't understand why that disconnect is happening, and then like it causes just a deep psychic damage that they can't quite reconcile.
I really question the idea that it's like helping you to like not be a serial killer, to like see relatable aspects of a serial killer. I think that what would help you would be like positive role models. You can show people who've been through trauma that, and then someone might be like, oh, I relate to this stuff. And you can even show people who are doing harmful things, but they're not like murdering a bunch of women. They're not like abducting a bunch of like inviting a bunch of gay black guys for hookups and then murdering them and then living in the filth of their bodies and cannibalizing them or whatever stuff. That's not the character that you can use to relate to someone who's been through some trauma. There's lots of people who go through trauma. We actually live under a society that is constantly traumatizing all the time, both because of its economic mode of production, its historic legacies of like traumatic ideologies, and so much else, right?
Why do we need to look at the example of the person who, again, is used as the example of someone who's irredeemable, the example of the person who is traumatized, does horrible things, and won't get better because we know they're just going to have like a life in prison from now on. Like, they're not going to get better. Yeah. So, like, what is there to learn from that, actually? Serial killers have been, like, it was one of my earliest and biggest special interests, and, like, I definitely know that a part of that is that all the media around it is saying, like, if you are a weird kid who can't get on with anyone, who's been a bit traumatized by your upbringing, then, like, I went off it when I started to realize where I could just like get better from my trauma, and then I started to approach the science around it with a more skeptical eye, and I was like, shit, all of this is actually just fucking gibberish by a cop who's trying to sell the death penalty to people.
Right. Douglas has never actually proven his method in the field. Like, he's never actually proven, like, all this stuff I have about, like, how we understand serial killers is so useful for catching serial killers, because he hasn't fucking caught any. The idea that we need to understand them, I question that on its fundamental level. The only, like, tangible effect it's going to have is people who have been, like, traumatized in their childhood, who, like, have developed, like, deeply violent tendencies and, like, a disdain for human life, who can kind of relate to the trauma that you're explaining that this serial killer's gone through, might be like, yeah, he's just like me FR. Wow. It's got a season 2 coming too, right?
What about John Wayne Gacy?
I mean, I guess I assume so, but I also, on some level, I can't imagine it. It's not sexy, in the way that I think was kind of part of the voyeuristic pull of Dahmer for a lot of people.
Also, in the last episode, when Gacy kills somebody, like he's wearing the clown suit, and it's like, you don't care at all about John Wayne Gacy. Like, he didn't do that. So you're just remaking it. I think Casey Anthony, they might do. I can't believe that. Evan Peters is a really pretty good actor. Like, he conveys a warmth in Dahmer.
I think he's definitely the best thing in the show. You can't help but kind of like see him in this sympathetic kind of way because that's how Evan Peters plays him.
The Death Kit episode. I can't help but think, watching that episode, like, Dahmer, no, you could be happy. Dahmer, please. The main feeling I get from Dahmer is that it's a show that keeps implying that there's a reason why it exists, but it never actually conveys what that reason is. The reason is ever deferred. There's no reason for it.
So you're no longer as much a stalwart defender of Dahmer as you were previously.
Well, I went into it with a lot of hope, Jack. I went into it with a lot of hope.
To reiterate some things I said in the video, you know, when it comes to awareness, I think you're always going to have that argument about whether a piece of media is exposing something important by exposing something kind of tragic or traumatic or just kind of grotesque. The argument on whether this is actually shocking people into being exposed to something so that they can be informed in some kind of way is always going to be there. Dahmer is a popular show. It's probably going to end up being the most popular piece of Dahmer related media. So for anyone that doesn't know about that story or doesn't know about the specifically relevant details of that story, it's going to be useful to them potentially. All context removed, I'm generally the sort of person that's going to say that art is art and it should kind of just exist even if it's just posing questions, and even if those questions aren't necessarily that interesting, or maybe even if I disagree with what I think it's trying to say. In general, I think there's just value in controversial art existing. The reason I ended up making the video wasn't just because of my opinions on the show, but also after learning about outer context of the show's production, I felt like it opened up more interesting ethical questions, and that's kind of what the video was more trying to be about. This also just a quick note that, okay, so we went to New York, we went to Philly, both cool places, but we've now been to Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, and I must say, it's a very pretty place. They got this, they got like a cool... There's like a city island kind of thing. It's very interesting. I'm a big fan. There was a mini golf over there. Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. I'm gonna be moving here. An incredible city. Now, one thing I will say I've had lingering thoughts about since the Dahmer video has been my sort of incomplete thoughts on the subject of celebrity, where this kind of voyeuristic or fetishistic examination into people's semi-public, semi-private, sometimes fully private lives, when do we start to see some kind of ethical nuance to that? And on that note, I hope you all look forward to the next video, which is about Pam and Tommy. I was thinking about doing some kind of two-camera thing, but then I didn't think to do it when we actually did the call. So I'm now gonna, after this call, film a bunch of like to the side, maybe me just going, oh yeah, as you're speaking.
Okay. Any comment about what people have said about, like, I think, oh, how lovely to have took the time to say something nice, and that's nice. Just always taking the time to just say something nice is so important in the world.
Wow.